Right, in order to prepare the rangefinder for installation, I'll show you what I've done. First I'll remove that screw. To get the rangefinder in, basically it's easiest if it's in the close focus position, which would be like this. You can see the angle of it at the top there. Now, the rangefinder comes with a little slot visible down here, and you can put a screw in there. And that will hold the rangefinder in that position. Basically it means that this arm is pulled backwards. It makes it easier to insert the rangefinder because it's a bit of an act with this camera. So that's done, that's all set, ready to go. I'll put a smear of molybdenum over this contact face here where it contacts the arm in the rangefinder, in the camera. I'm going to put a drop of lacquer by both of the mounting holes there. That's so that once the rangefinder is screwed down into position, it's much less likely to shift if the camera gets bumped. So now, zoom you back out, and I can swing the rangefinder into position. At least that's the theory. Here we go. Now, the rangefinder coupling, that'll be easy because that's behind, it's been held back in the close focus position. But this piece here, this lever here, which I'll zoom you back in again. This lever shifts the frames when you put a different lens into the camera. That couples with the slot in the arm coming up from the body, and you have to make sure that the pin drops into that slot, which it is in this case. Two screws hold the rangefinder to the body. I can drop one in from there. And the other one drops in from the top. The second screw drops in from here. Of course, it's nice when it drops in square and drops straight into the position. And if we're lucky, that's what happened. And it did. It's amazing. Right, so those two screws are in position. I can tighten them up. And this one here. Be careful putting the screwdriver in for this screw because I don't want to hit the screwdriver against that front surface mirror. Alright, so the rangefinder's in position now in the body. That screw I'd put into the rangefinder to hold the arm back out of the way, I can now lift out of position. And if I press in the rangefinder pin in the body here, you'll see that the front lens here, coupled to the arm, moves. In a similar fashion, if I press on the brass collar on the inside, you may see that the frame shifts here. Oh, that's a bit harder to see. I'll zoom you in a bit. The frame is shifted at this point here, and I'll press that brass collar down again, and you can see it shift as I do that repeatedly. So our rangefinder is all in place. It hasn't been adjusted yet, and it may well need some adjustment. So in order to adjust it, I'll put the lens back on the camera, which hasn't been serviced yet, by the way, but it appears to be in good condition, and I don't expect any problems with that. So I'll look through the rangefinder out the window at a suitable target and see how the images align at the infinity position. If they're good at the infinity position, I will then do the same with a close focus target and check that the indicated distance looks approximately correct, in which case we're good to go. Right, well, at the infinity position the images do not meet, they don't even come close to it. So I've got to check my adjustment, and I've got to make sure I adjust the right thing here, otherwise I'm in trouble. That's better. I'll just tighten that up. Right, the horizontal adjustment for the rangefinder is made at this point here, the adjustment screw nearest the eyepiece. That's correct, but I notice that my vertical alignment is not good. And I'll just check again to see whether the moving image, as you swing this backwards and forwards, one of the image moves as you adjust the focus, the other one appears stationary in the finder, and the moving image is high. There are two ways that you can adjust your vertical alignment, and one of them is very exciting, and I suggest you don't do it. One is to loosen this screw here and move this bracket forward or backwards, which changes the tilt of the semi-silvered mirror and so shifts the image up or down in the finder. The other thing that you can do is you can move the front element here on the front of the finder, and if that's moved up or down, that will have the effect of shifting the alignment of your two images, and that's what I'm going to do. So first I'm going to check which way I need to move it, and I'm going to do that simply by placing my finger on the top and pressing down on that arm while I'm looking through the finder to see what difference it makes to the images. And I notice that if I put any downward pressure on that, it just makes the moving image appear to go up in the finder. So I need to bring up this piece at the front of the finder, and it'll be held in place with two screws, one either side. So I've just loosened that screw slightly, and I've just raised that glass by putting my screwdriver underneath it and just moving it very slightly, and I want to see whether my images are now vertically aligned. Well, they're much better than they were. Let's see if I can do the other, get to the other screw. And I'll see what sort of result I get. Oh yes, that's pretty good. Obviously needs a little bit more than that, but not much. Oh, that's probably too much. Yes, I suspected as much. Okay, so I'm going to do this screw up at this end. It's hard to get at that screw on that arm. That's sufficient. And I know I need to bring this down slightly. Probably not that much. Certainly not. A lot of toing and froing is needed with making adjustments like this because the amount of movement required is very slight, and landing on the exact spot you need to be is almost a matter of hit and miss. I'll bring you back once I've got that right. I'm very happy with the vertical alignment and the horizontal alignment now in this rangefinder. They're just spot on. So I'm pretty much done at the top of the camera, and I can look to be closing it up at this point. I want to clean the plastic lens on the top of that meter dial, that meter viewing window, just because I can see a tiny smudge on it. That's plastic, that window. It scratches very, very easily. It goes hazy if you try to clean it too much with anything. So be very gentle about doing that. Don't be wiping at it unless there's an obvious need. I'll find the cotton buds. Here we go. That's good. I'm checking my glass on my rangefinder. Make sure that I haven't introduced any smudges or fingerprints while I've been working on it. That all looks good. The shutter release button needs to go back in the body. That only goes in one direction. I'll put a smear of molybdenum in that little cutout groove there where it runs against the post. We have a spring on top of the meter dial, the return spring for the meter setting button. That drops in the middle. We have the meter setting button which sits on top of that. Some of those buttons have got a pin in the middle which tends to centre them up on the spring quite well. Others do not. And the top cover, which is all clean and ready to go, should just lower into position. Here we go. I'm holding that down with my thumb. I'll check the action. I'm also looking at the frame counter dial to see if it's working correctly, moving just one frame at a time and aligning so that the numbers line up correctly. And it looks to me like it's moving just slightly too much. So I'll lift that top cover off. And here, I'll zoom you in a bit. The cocking rack hits this pin here, this screw, which moves the frame counter. I'm just going to adjust that in slightly because it appeared to be moving the frame counter too far. The top cover, I've just dislodged the meter setting button and spring, so I'll get those back in place. The spring is doing its best to get away. And our shutter release button was also trying to get away. Lower that top cover in place and I'll try again. It's certainly moving just one frame, it's moving smoothly, but it does just takes a little bit beyond the alignment mark for the numbers. I'll try again. That's good. Then the frame line numbers fall right into that notch, nice and nicely aligned there. So the top cover can be screwed down at this point because I'm done with it. So I have two chromed brass screws, countersunk head screws that go in at the rewind end of the top cover. These are the same size as the nickel plated screws that have been used elsewhere in the camera, particularly on the base plate. So you need to take care to make sure you're using the chrome plated screws on the top cover and you are not using them elsewhere. There we have it, the top cover is all in place. The rewind knob can be fitted. Just its black shroud there goes on the top, and then the knob itself screws on the top. Put something through the fork of the rewind shaft to stop it turning, and then just turn the knob with my fingers. That's the top of the camera dealt with. I can turn my attention to the bottom of the camera next. I need to clean and refit the chrome trim that goes on the bottom. Once that's done, I can put the leatherettes on the camera. So I need to get all this adhesive and dirt off this trim. So I'm using some CRC Lectra Clean there, which is a fairly aggressive solvent, and it'll soften that rubbish up. I'm just rubbing around on that surface with a toothpick, which removes any loosened adhesive and backing from the leatherette. You should use this electroclean probably in a well ventilated area, otherwise your children will be born with flippers. Obviously, the main need here in terms of cleaning is to make sure that any areas of the chrome that will be visible once the camera is assembled are nice and clean. It's also useful to have a nice clean surface to glue your leatherettes back to, but it certainly doesn't need to be pristine. It just needs to be level, smooth and grease free. That's good. Let's give a quick clean to this side, a little bit of naphtha. Now I'm going to take some care to get down along this edge here, because leatherettes typically shrink back over time, and so that glue line will become visible, and I prefer it doesn't. That will do nicely. So we can go back to the camera body. Zoom you out a bit. I'll remove the film advance lever. And I have this shortened camera base fitted with 2 screws. We can replace that with the proper camera base and then fit all 7 screws that hold that in place. This usually goes pretty smoothly. There's no great need to be too cautious putting these screws in. If I'm very lucky, I'll get to the end of this and I should have exactly the right number of screws. It's worse if you've got 1 screw too many when you get to the end of the job and you wonder where you've left one out. Alright, that's the 7 screws. Just check that they are tight. Occasionally you'll see cameras where these screws have worked themselves loose over time. And sometimes you'll see little bumps on the leatherette underneath the screws where the screw heads have risen up against it. Okay, so that's all good. I need to fit the base leatherette, which is here. And before I fit that, I'll just give that a quick scrape and a wipe with some naphtha to remove any dust and dirt from the back of it. And before we fit the leatherette, There are two small aluminium patches that fit here and here, which basically are just to stop the leatherette, make sure the leatherette lies on flat, and I'll glue those back in place. There is one on the front of the camera at this point. On that port we have access to the adjustment screw for the cord tension, and likewise that'll need to be glued back in place too. And that's there. The two smaller ones here and here. And of course the clean side was in and the dirty side was out typically. Those ones are quite clean on both sides, and it's not because I've cleaned them. It's because the leatherette was probably not particularly well glued at those spots. Right, so I need to find some adhesive. I'll be back.